Hello, I'm Oscar Rodriguez. Today I would like to present to you a topic that has interested me, the Cuban Revolution. I'd like to talk about the general background of this topic as well as the specifics because this topic does cover a lot. Certain questions I had were what was the Cuban Revolution? I really had no clue what the Cuban Revolution was until I did the extra credit for this course, and there was a teacher talking about, she went in depth about how the Cuban Revolution, what the Cuban Revolution was, and how it impacted Cuba, as well as who was Fidel Castro. I knew him as a picture. I seen him in pictures and stuff like that. I knew his name. I really just didn't know who he was and how much of an impact he really had in the Cuban community. As much as I enjoyed the presentation of the extra credit of the Cuban Revolution, I read several books about this topic as well as articles, and I did use some of her information because it really did help me out for this topic. Even though the extra credit presentation did show a lot of information, I went besides that point and I did more of my own research because I was very interested in that topic. I read several books and I did read several articles as well. I did not get all my information from the extra credit. Another question I did have was why would the Cuban people want to challenge and wanted to be part of the Cuban Revolution? Being that Cuba was in development in the 1950s and they were a free country in that at that point, why weren't they satisfied that it was kind of a vacation spot? And because it was a vacation spot, it would bring money and it would bring them jobs as well. Why weren't they satisfied? For a long time, Cuba was a colony of Spain. Jose Marti was sick of it, so he led the independence movement, what you would say, quote unquote, Cuba for all. They went to war with Spain for independence. In 1898 is when they declared their independence of Spain. After Cuba was free, they were a nation in development. Because they're in development, the USA would always keep an eye on their sugar and they're strategizing on vacation. Because as time went by, Cuba became a vacation spot. The supply for weapons and also helped them as well. So therefore, when they received their independence, the USA wanted part of them. So they pretty much did like a deal. If Cuba wanted to do any action or do something, they would pretty much ask USA. They couldn't do anything besides, if they wanted to do anything independently, they couldn't do that. So technically, in a way, they were still kind of part of someone else. Cuba was a nation of development in the 1950s, and it also became a vacation spot for the United States for people that had money and could afford it. And the pictures below show a family that is taking a picture with dancers, cigars, because after drinking, they would have a Cuban cigar, and the picture all the way to the left would be advertisement. They would advertise pictures like that, so people from the United States or people who could afford it would go over there and do things they wouldn't do back at home, and as well as casinos, because they know that people really enjoy spending the money and having a possibility of earning money as well. The people of Cuba were not happy. They weren't happy because employment rate was very low. They would struggle to get opportunities, and the jobs they did offer would be lack of pay, so they could barely even feed their own families. The pictures on the right, the one up top is two parents yelling at their children, and I put this picture on there because it symbolizes the United States pretty much not happy with Cuba when they made their own choice. They wanted Cuba to make the choices the United States wanted them to make. So therefore, the people were not happy because the choices the United States wanted Cuba to make would affect them in a very bad way. And the people were not happy with the presidents because the presidents were corrupted. They would do what the United States wanted them to do because they would get paid. And they were very selfish. They didn't care about the people. What they would do would be they would tell the people they would do a certain action, and then once time went by, they completely forgot about the people. The people weren't happy as well with the tourists because they would have all these opportunities to do all these things, and they would please those people but would get nothing in return. It's just seeing someone in the spotlight, and it just kind of hurts because you wish you could be in that spot as well. Cuba was becoming very controversial. The government successfully expanded of the tourist industry, which is now serving hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, but also is dividing Cuban workers and fueling prostitution. New faculties are going up all over the island. Tourists, but not Cubans, have access to new model cars, fuel, and special stocks of food reserved for hotels only. Jobs in this sector are sought after intensely because they provide workers with access to dollars. With the ration system providing urban dwellers with enough food for only about 12 days and supplies on the private market expands. It is easy to understand why workers are upset. They get paid $5 to $7 a month. Women go into prostitution due to the fact that the presidents in charge would not give women rights. Certain fields were not for women and would only let men work. Therefore, women would go into prostitution in the city because tourists would pay. In the matter of fact, as well, people would go into the city to beg as well because they know that because there was tourists involved, money would be involved, and they always had cash on them. Lastly, it was very rough for the rural areas because the plantation was becoming really low and it was just not selling at that time, and it was just really hard to grow as well. So jobs like that would be really hard to even work for at that time. Gerardo Machado was involved in the sugar mills. That was the way he had his money invested. He had slave labor and reforms. As soon as sugar prices fall, which cause unemployment, students start to protest because they would have no jobs and it would start a lack of food. He he would do things the way the USA wanted him to do things. The people later found out, and the people were not happy. They would start to protest. Therefore, when people started to protest, he hired secret police, and he would handle things very violently to shut those things down. The USA later finds out and was not too happy with the way he was handling the situation. Cuba later thinks that it is a great idea to get a group of 5 presidents together. They thought that getting more than one brain would handle the situation a lot better, but it would seem like every president would want more power than the other, so they would bump heads and it would not work. The Cuban president in 1934 was Luck. He was outspoken to the United States. He talked down to the people from the United States. He did not like the people from the United States. He wanted to be free from the influence of the United States, and therefore, the U.S. doesn't like him. He only lasts 100 days because he was not a good influence according to the United States, and he gets kicked out. Batista's behind the scenes calling the shots behind the powerless presidents. In 1940, Batista is elected. He couldn't run for a second year, but what they did was they did something to go past that, and he was elected in 1952 for the second time. For the second time, he was very power hungry. He wanted to increase Cuba's wealth, so therefore he would get more wealth. He creates more gambling, more hotels, and neglects his own people. Groups start to protest how life on the island has become. Castro was watching from a distance and was not pleased with what was going on. He wanted to overthrow the government, so he started to slowly gather 1,200 men. One by one, he would start. From the words from Fidel Castro, when did we decide to attack Moncada? When we became convinced that nobody was going to do anything, that there was nothing to be any fight against Batista, and that many of the existing groups, in which there were lots and lots of people who were members of several groups at the same time, were not prepared, not organized to carry out the armed struggle that I was hoping for. He infiltrated other organizations. There was one that belonged to the party of the corrupt Orthodox Party administration that had been overthrown on the 10th of March. It was conspiring against Batista too. It had large stockpile of weapons, a little of everything. What it didn't have was men. The assault on the Moncada barracks was not a success. What had happened was they go into the whole situation confidently, and a certain thing that they didn't expect for it to happen happened, and they had to retreat and they had to plan differently. People got hurt. No one got caught. People went back to the farm, but he was not happy whatsoever. The people were actually not having it, so they had a tactic that they wanted to scare the people. So what they were doing was they were throwing bombs in the city and being destructive on their property because they wanted no more. They wanted the government to see their frustration and to back down. Castro leads attack at 26 in Santiago de Cuba and is defeated and taken to trial. They plan to attack July 26, 1953, because that was the day that he thought that the people would be hungover, they would be partying, they would just be caught off guard, but they actually weren't. And when he approached them, they were shooting around and he got captured. But this was so important because he named the day he actually succeeded after the day he failed. He is taken into trial, and the last words he had to say ended up being 4 hours long. Like in one of those movies, when you watch movies and the person gets to talk and it's super dramatic, well, that's how it was in his case. And once he was done, he looked at one of the people and he asked them if they wrote that down. And to me, I thought that was super Instead of being locked up for all those years he was supposed to be locked up for, he only served a certain amount of years, and he was pardoned from serving the other years, and he actually went somewhere else, as in Mexico, and he started planning to overrule Batista. In jail, he actually met Che Guevara, and right when he met him, he had a gift for people. He was one of those people that everyone immediately cares about. It was his naturalness, his simplicity, his sense of companionship. He was a doctor. He was working at a social security institution doing some sort of research, cardiac work, something or the other. He actually got him to work with him after he got out of jail, and he practiced with him to overrule Batista. As soon as he was ready for his guerrilla warfare, and he fought in the mountains. And when they were fighting, they were putting up a good fight, and Batista's people actually were like, is it even worth fighting for? And they just stopped fighting, and Batista got so nervous, and he started to panic, and he fled the country. And at that time as well, there was a revolution going in the city because the people were done. They were protesting as well. So it went in his as well as the U.S. They were not supporting him anymore because it was just getting out of hand, and they were no longer helping him with weapons, and they just gave up on him. And that went on Castro's side as well. When they took over and they accomplished their goal, they had a huge march. The people loved it. Everyone participated, and they just were having a good time. It finally, their goal was reached. They overthrew the bad people and the corruption, and as soon as they were done, they trashed all their casinos. Castro did not want to be president at first. He had no interest in being president. What he wanted to pursue was the revolution, the army, the development of the heroic rebel army. The first combat was against a mixed patrol of Army and Navy troops. It took place 46 days after we disembarked on January 17th, 1957. We landed on December 2nd, 1956. That was our first victorious encounter, the first small but symbolic victory. 5 days later, a platoon of paratroops marching at the head of a column of 300 men fell into an ambush we'd planned down to the last detail.